welcome to Financially Savvy in 20 Minutes. Today we actually have a very special podcast because, well, they're always special, but this one is actually at a live conference, and it is the first annual that they have here in the city of Santa Ana, California, and it's Posible. And it's actually following up one of the most conferences that they've had every year in LA, which is Posible LA, and it's usually held in the Pasadena Convention Center. So I'm really excited to be not only hosting today's podcast from the actual conference, but also having my fellow panelists be a part of it. So obviously in the beginning of the show, you heard kind of what we talked about and the importance of it. So I wanted to make sure I got a chance to speak with these ladies behind the scenes. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening through audio, I wanted to just kind of go into the real questions that most of us always have, especially as women, especially being Latina, and this month being Hispanic Heritage Month, whether you identify as Latinx, Latino, whatever, Chicano. This is definitely a time that we need to talk about not only our proud heritage, but our money, our finances,
yes.
And what more, but having these amazing women talk about their career paths, but kind of how they dealt with money themselves from childhood to now. So one of the cool questions I always ask people is, do you remember the first time that you got paid, whether it was a check, cash, maybe it was your first 9 to 5, or maybe it was your first side hustle? What did that feel like, and how did that make you think about money?
Well, for as long as I can remember, I have always figured out a way to make some money. And so I used to babysit when I was younger, maybe 12 years old, and I started babysitting, and I remember just getting, paid for that and thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this money? And so then my parents, took me to the bank a little bit later and opened an account for me to take the money into the bank and to see that process and learn about it. And it was, they co-signed for me or whatever. But at the time, it just felt really good. And then I would get, a statement that would tell me what my balance was, and then how that little bit of money grew over time as I was, doing more jobs and babysitting more. And so it always felt very empowering for me that I had some money. And then I remember making, I'm a banker by trade, and so I remember making my first loan even when I had money. And my grandmother, I remember she hadn't gotten her Social Security check, and so she says, well, I'm gonna make some tamales and I need to go buy all this meat, and so I need to borrow $40. And I said, oh, no, well, I have $40. I actually have $40 to lend you. And then every time she would pay me back, because it became kind of a consistent thing, she would give me $2 back in interest. And so that really taught me that. That taught me the concept of interest very early on in life. But yeah, I remember those very memories very fondly.
I love that, Patty, because it's having the generational part that comes with it. And obviously she was teaching you two how to handle and be responsible. And I think that's really important for kids to learn early on, where parents start to say, hey, you're going to be in charge of the finances and coming along with it. And why not help abuelita, especially she's going to make you something yummy to eat, right?
Exactly.
I love that.
Love my tamales.
How about you, Sylvia? What was your first encounter?
My first encounter with receiving money in a formal way was when I had my first job in retail, and I got paid. I started working when I was about 16 or 17 years old, and I worked at Woolworth, and that was my first job. And so when I got paid, I remember that I felt very empowered. Then I was thinking before I got paid that I was going to give my younger sisters some money, like a domingo. But then I became very possessive with the way they would spend it. I would reprimand them if they would spend it buying magazines like 17 or something like that. And so, but then I decided to change my mind about that, and I let it go. I felt that I needed to allow them to spend the money whichever way they felt. And so that was my first experience. And then after that, I was careful with money, not to overspend or to manage it. And as a result of that, money in my life I have never really lacked money. I have always had money, maybe sometimes not enough.
We can all relate.
But I have been very fortunate that I never stopped working, even going to college after that. This is through the junior year in high school, I worked on weekends in retail. Throughout college, I worked on weekends and maybe evenings and graduate school as well. So I always had money coming in.
I love it. And I think you just said, both of you said it, it's about empowerment, right? And I think, especially for women, especially for Latina women too. I think it's such an important way that we can help out our siblings, help out our family members, but at an early age you start to recognize how we manage our money. And I talk to so many people, I interview so many people, and I think that's the first thing they say. Right off the bat, I started to notice I'm not going to spend it on frivolous things. I wanted to either reinvest it in something or do something that was going to help my family, you know, something that becomes worthwhile.
Yes.
And maybe this wasn't in your own homes, but maybe can you touch base a little bit about how it was for you speaking about money with your parents or even your girlfriends? Because I think this is such a huge issue going on right now, where we now are seeing more conferences catered around for women. But can you remember maybe the first those initial conversations with your parents or maybe your close girlfriends about money?
Sure. I mean, with my parents, it was always the conversation about financial stability, right? Having a nest egg, having something to fall back on. That's what my parents always taught us, right? You save your money for that rainy day. You know, it'll come, and then you'll have something to fall back on. And also just having some independence, right?
Yeah.
Because you have the ability to purchase whatever you need. I think for me, you know, I've worked my entire life. I mean, since, you know, from babysitting jobs, evolved into working at McDonald's, evolved into working at school while doing work study, while going to college at Cal. And so I always had this, you know, I was used to working. I had this attitude that, you know, work is part of the deal, right? And so financial flexibility came with that because, you know, I had some money. And the conversation with my parents when I went to college was they had 3 other kids. You know, my dad was the only working parent.
Were you the
very
eldest
middle?
or the youngest?
I was the second one.
Ah, okay.
And so, but my parents were very much, you know, lower middle class, and you know, you don't have a lot of money to send your kid to college. So I had every grant, every scholarship that I could apply for that could offset the cost of school was what I did.
Yeah.
But then for the extra money that you need for books and for lodging,
Gas,
and you know,
everything.
gas and food, and you know, sometimes you want to go out.
Right.
I mean, all the things that you want to do. So I got a work study program at the school, and so I was able to make money and have that flexibility and not be so stressed. And I would even finance my trips back home to go see my parents, because they gave me a credit card when I went to school, but they said emergencies only.
And what are emergencies?
And what are emergencies?
Yeah.
Like life or death or what?
Yes.
And so I didn't want to put more burden on my parents, given that they had my other 3 siblings to, you know, to take care of it. So that's when I found my job. And then after that, going through college, I found jobs in the summers, right? So corporations have jobs that they can give you as internships if you apply for that. And so I had jobs at Chevron Corporation 3 summers that I was in Cal.
Awesome.
And so and they paid well. And they also had scholarship programs that I could apply for.
Because you're part of the
Yes, because you're part of the
family.
company. And so that really kind of had that multiplier effect that, you know, I just felt really great about where I was, even able to buy my own little car, you know, to get around. And so, and so those were the conversations. And then with girlfriends, sometimes, you know, you don't talk as much about money because, you know, you don't want to be like, how much do you make? But, you know, with your really close girlfriends, I think it is something that you talk about, right? Because you want to really understand, number one, are you getting paid what you're worth, right? Are there other opportunities? What are they learning, you know, as they kind of go into this journey with you? And I think that the support that you get there is, you know, just amazing.
You said flexibility and being able to have that open conversation with them, I think is so key, because if we don't have those conversations, they will repeat the same mistakes you did. And
that's right.
And I think I have a very similar story with college. It was the same thing. It was like I had the scholarships, I had this, I also had my parents help me, and I still work full time, and I still had student debt, so
loans
and everything. So I think it's important for people to understand that you do have to have some flexibility coming from multiple streams of income, right?
Sure.
Especially when you're going through so much, obviously, the responsibility of
Expense.
school and expense that comes with it, but it's doable. Obviously, now you look back and like, that was a hard lesson learned, but it's good because now you know how to manage multiple.
Well, you have an
nest eggs.
appreciation.
An appreciation for it.
Yes.
Absolutely. And you teach your friends
Your
to
kids
do the same
too.
with your kids.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And how about you? Did you have maybe that conversation with your parents or your girlfriends?
Well, with my parents, for example, with my mom, we talked about money, we talked about saving, we talked about not wasting money, and my mom doesn't believe in credit cards. And for example, she even to this day, she's concerned when we use a credit card to pay something, and we tell her, Mom, this is not a credit card, I'm using my debit card, I'm
Right.
paying automatically. So she did not like the idea of us accumulating debt. And that is because my dad, he built his business, he learned how to live with debt. He was a farmer in Mexico, and he worked here in the United States for many years, and during that time he saved and bought cars and a ranch in Mexico and a house. And then he moved to Mexico and things were well, but then once in Mexico things did not go very well. La cosecha no dio, and then o la otra,
harvest, for those that don't know, yeah.
próximo año, the next year the harvest didn't pay up, and so he would get in debt, and my mom didn't like to see that.
Yeah.
My mom worked from home because we had a farm in Mexico, and she used to sell milk from home, so that was her source of income from home. And then my dad, well, he was a farmer, so he made money that way. And then growing up, for a conversation with friends about money, I didn't really talk with friends about money a lot because I knew I was going to need money for school and college, so I applied to grants. I mean, thank God for the college corner in high school where I learned about the Pell Grants. And then I learned about financial aid, so I learned about how to apply for the grants that way. I also get my eye open on earning scholarships.
Yes.
And so I got a scholarship when I first graduated from high school. I got scholarships from women organizations,
Awesome.
And then I applied for.
Sorry, shout out to women organizations.
Yes.
I think half of my scholarships are women organizations. Yes.
Yes, from women organizations. Then I applied for the federal grant program, for Cal Grants, and because I went to school here, I went to USC, and so I was eligible for those grants. And I also worked on weekends. Then for grad school, I went to school out of the country, so the grants from California didn't apply, and then I applied for loans in addition to working. But growing up with, because my parents separated when I was about 13 years old, I was lucky that, and a lot of people cannot believe that I graduated from high school, and then I went to East LA College for my first 2 years, and my bachelor's degree I got from USC. I went to USC for 2 years. I graduated from USC, and for my graduate work, I went to the American University in Washington, D.C., and it's also a private university. So a lot of people cannot believe that we grew, my sisters and I, we are the oldest of four. We all graduated from college and private universities. And so people cannot believe that we grew up with a single mom, and all of us have college degrees and graduate degrees, and also from private universities.
That's such an inspiration, and obviously you had that real life role model that was like, you're gonna go to school no matter what.
Yes.
And shout out to Eli, my husband's a professor there. So yes, it's wonderful to see that you've gone through these different stages, and I think that this is another way to do another podcast on just how to fund your college tuition, how to be able to fund the life after, because it really does give us a stepping stone. I mean, the careers that we have today, if it wasn't for the education that we have, I mean, half of the time I get hired just because like, you have a master's, you're part of that 4% of Latinos in the US that have a master's. I'm like, let's make sure I get paid. Exactly. So I thank you for sharing this, your stories with us, and I would love to have you back on also, because there's just, I feel like we can dive into it, but being able to have people listen to this under 20 minutes, sometimes that's all they need to do. There might be somebody listening as they're driving in their car, listening to the podcast, and be like, I was about to quit school today, or I was just thinking, how am I going to pay my tuition? So you give people hope, and I thank you for your time. And today's conference, obviously empowering, and we're doing an all Spanish panel, so I think that's another wonderful thing to be able to do this bilingual journey to give this support. So we will have in the show notes all of their contact info on how you can get a hold of them if you wanted to follow or any question. But thank you, ladies, for being a part of this, and we'll definitely be having them next. And we'll stay tuned for the next